Hi, welcome back to The Creator's Soul, a podcast miniseries about the creative process and its application in every area of your life. I'm your co-host, Elizabeth, a creative producer and director based in New York City.
And I'm Heijun, an energy and leadership coach with a background in Wall Street and New York City tech startup. In today's episode, we're going to talk about what to do when the world responds to your creation. You may unexpectedly discover a new you or uncover a new opportunity, because rarely are you just done with one project you initially embark your journey on. Everyone, welcome back to our final episode of The Creator's Soul. So when I was thinking about this episode, I was thinking about the Hierophant card in tarot. Hierophant, which is ruled by Taurus, and it means tradition, structure, rules, patterns, predictability. And no artist or creator likes that. You know, we like to be creative and like think outside the box and break all the rules and whatnot. But there comes a point where like you put something out in the world and it's either received well or it's not by the general public. And the general public is a form of pattern and societal rules. So I think that when it doesn't matter what you do, anytime you put yourself out there in the world, you could either be empowered or disempowered by the existing structures and existing trends. And some people just keep at it and become pioneers and convince the rest of the world why they should follow this new thing anyway, or they just kind of cave in to the quote unquote matrix, like existing structures. Or the third route, they find out how to amplify the existing structures in their own way and fine tune it and enhance it. Like this can be found in like any industry, I feel like medical, wellness, artistic, industrial. So I'm curious, Elizabeth, like throughout your career, what are some instances where like you've put out something in the world and you're like, oh, okay, now I know where I stand relative to the general standard or the public standard. Yeah, what are some examples of like how you've responded to to the outer result?
Yeah, I think events are a really good example of a structure where there are social norms
Mhm.
and you attempt to cultivate an environment where you are creating an experience for people that might follow social norms or those rules and structures quite precisely, but you might also be breaking them and creating something that's more memorable or new for people to experience.
Mhm.
And I think one of the things for me in those instances are it's a little playful to initially put together an event plan and say, okay, here's what the space is going to look like. Here's what the agenda is. If there's
Mhm.
a food involved, food and beverage is an amazing example of social norms and social structures. It can be very inclusive and bring people together, but it can also be something that alienates people and makes them feel uncomfortable. How you eat, what you're eating. Are you eating meat? Are you eating meat and dairy? Are you eating fish? Are you
Mhm.
eating any sort of animal product at all? So when I'm creating events, I feel like that's something that I've realized is a sort of creation process every time that ultimately ends with these absolutes and structures that are present just
Mhm.
by virtue of being in a society.
Mhm.
So one of the things that I always try to pay attention to when I've completed an event are the responses from people who've attended.
Mhm.
A lot of times in the moment, you'll also get some really great responses. You'll see if people are responding well to the way that the entrance is set up to receive them. So are they following traffic patterns? If there's a little blockade or a stanchion, are they trying to go around it to the right or to the left? Did you intend for
Mhm.
them to go around it to the right or to the left? And then comparing notes, something
Yeah.
as simple as that can be really telling of the outcome. And
Yeah.
sometimes the outcomes are not what you're expecting.
Mhm.
I always feel so and I bring up the floor plan in particular because I feel that no matter how much you plan, there's always going to be a surprise as to human behavior in a space with other humans.
Mm-hmm.
And I really love that. I think it's so beautiful, but it's something for me that I've encountered surprises like people going the wrong way, people getting lost, people feeling that there should have been a vegan option or a kosher
Mm-hmm.
option at a meal, or that the entertainment was too long or too short. I take all of that in
Yeah.
stride and kind of think about, okay, well, what was the purpose of bringing people together? What was the event for? And then
Mm-hmm.
who all got invited and who was there in that space? Because it
Mm-hmm.
creates this little ecosystem where things are going to be reactive and you'll
Yeah.
have this feedback loop from people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so cool. Like you're literally in the space of seeing how things are received firsthand. Not only like curating their experience, but like on the back of that, like how they're gonna feel.
Mhm.
Because I'm sure like the events, like I'm assuming you set up events for like shows and stuff like that. Um, right? Like I know you just did
Yeah.
a fashion show of some sort.
Yeah, I did. I just did a show for it was a award ceremony for the fashion industry, red carpet,
Yeah.
cool speakers, like really great combination of people. But I've also done events for pop-up shops in New York where just anyone off the street can walk in and experience products.
Hmm.
I've organized big sit-down gala dinners that people can come and they're going to be networking, but there's also a three-course meal being served.
Yeah.
I've done things where, the purpose of the event is food and beverage tastings. So
Hmm.
there's little stations, people walk around, they interact, they have photo opportunities, things like that. And,
Right.
I've also done like little tiny, like 10-person dinners too, where people sit down and it's a very special moment and it's curated so that people can celebrate an event or something in their lives.
Yeah.
So I've seen it in a lot of different ways. And
Yeah.
it there's always a surprise or something to be learned to
Hmm.
then take into the next iteration of that.
Hmm. Yeah, I completely understand what you mean. I mean, like, I feel like, I mean, I've had so many different jobs and so many different careers that at this point it's just like comical. But one thing that I keep running into is that, like, no matter how much budget an organization has, there's always room for improvement. There's always something to be like embellished or augmented or refined. I think this is where people need to realize, like, even if your original idea or even if your like initial big vision didn't, get received like the way you hoped it would, it doesn't mean that you still don't have a role as a creator. It doesn't mean that like there is no gap or room to like fill in, because I mean you've seen it firsthand. It sounds like, you're pretty much the backbone of these like major like events, or like the pop-ups or like the shows or whatever. And I'm sure like if you didn't do your part, the whole thing would just kind of like combust. There would be no gathering, there would be no people. The whole thing would be just like total crap. And I think that this is where people have to be start, like, as a listener, whoever's listening to this, like you have to be start discerning as to like, okay, where is that, like where's your opportunity to really add value? um there's always opportunities to add value. You just have to look for it. And it may not feel creative at first, but looking for an opening is creativity in and of itself. Um, and actually, through that opening, you could establish trends and new structures. Like, for example, Elizabeth, like, there's tons of event hosting companies, but like, you've built and is currently running one that's like very successful. It's like, why is that? Because you've noticed opportunities that other people have not in the space, you know?
Yeah, I believe and run my company based off of doing better every time
Yeah.
and using resources wisely, in that you are taking information and what you're experiencing in the moment, and then using that to then do better,
Yeah.
improve the level of stress that people are experiencing, improve the interactions, making them feel more authentic and real. And And that in turn usually inspires memorable moments or creativity. I
Yeah.
think it is really important to recognize what you said, where just because you're throwing a lot of resources at something doesn't mean that
Mhm.
it's going to turn out well.
Yeah.
And there's actually a concept that I'm developing right now. I've called it Torch. And
Mhm.
essentially, it's a 3-part micro short film series. What's a micro short? A micro short is a film that's 5 minutes or less.
Uh-huh.
Most shorts can be anywhere from 45 minutes or under, but
Right?
a micro short is a way to tell a story in a very condensed period of time.
Uh-huh.
So I've come up with this concept to do just that. Use resources in a way that allows you to get feedback faster,
Yeah.
but still do good work and still have resources behind you to do that work.
Uh-huh.
And the concept essentially is that you get $10,000 to create a micro short film,
Mhm.
everything from development, pre-production, production, post-production, development and marketing and distribution.
Yeah.
So through understanding how all of those resources can be applied in each stage of the film's
Yeah.
creation,
Mhm.
you're learning how to make decisions about what's essential to this story being told well.
Yeah.
Do you need to have do you really need 8 pages in that script, or can you make it 4?
Right. Right.
Can you do you is special effects really important to the film? Okay, maybe allocate more budget to that. But
Right.
you might also have to think about, okay, does that mean that I use a camera that's good, but maybe not my dream camera for
Yeah.
this film? It also allows for everyone involved to have some sort of sweat equity,
Yeah.
because $10,000 for a film with professionals attached to it really isn't that much money. But if you have people who are invested in creating something meaningful and worthwhile together, and they're all invested equally in the process,
Mhm.
you're able to then create something and then learn and grow for the next one. So
Yeah.
that by the time you're making a film that's $1 million,
Right.
you have this vocabulary and way of working with those people
Yeah.
that is going to be just igniting to your process. It's going to create such a dynamic synergy with that group of people, and
Right.
also foster really good decision making skills about how you use resources, how you use social structures or operational business structures. Like, for instance, in the film and entertainment industry, there's structures, there's rules, there are absolutes that you have to
Mhm.
pay attention to. But by taking it in this little microcosm, you're able to develop and evaluate much faster than if you would just blow $25,000-$30,000 on a short film when maybe it's your first or second or third, and you haven't developed the audience or the following just yet.
Yeah, so I get two things from that. The first thing is staying open. Like even if you kicked off this whole journey from the full chapter one, big picture vision, just staying open to like, okay, maybe you had that, maybe you needed that initial dream to get to a new dream. Like maybe you need to go through whatever pie in the sky wishes you had to even like discover new things about yourself as far as like what it is you want to do next. That's the first thing that I get. So like being flexible and staying open is important. The second thing that I get from that is like it kind of goes back to like when you were saying, okay, maybe we don't need 8 pages, we can reduce it down to 4 pages, and maybe we can allocate the budget to the special effects. Like that is so. That's what I meant by like you can challenge the matrix, you can challenge the structures, but in order for you to do that, you have to know the rules. You can't break the rules unless you know the rules. So this is where I think people kind of get tripped up. They're like, well, I create my own like unique thing. Like it's so brilliant. Why is it not accepted? Well, because you first have to follow like you have to like transcend the society, I feel like, in order to like really win it over. You have to first prove to it like, no, 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 I know how this game works. So I actually, it's like I love, as you know, like I love the short video, short content creation space because it's all about breaking rules. It's all about like
It
hooking
is.
people in. Yeah, it feels inappropriate because right, like a movie shot on iPhone can win an award these days. It feels kind of something's off about it. Like wait, like we didn't use like these Hollywood cameras or whatever, but like the thing is, it still looks like a very well put together film, and it opens people's minds to like, oh well, maybe I can make a movie on my iPhone. Then I thought I had to do XYZ. So I think this is where when you after going through the first four stages of creation and you get to this point and you're met with that public um response, you could lean even harder into the rules and see where your opening is to break it, because that's how you get noticed. Or you just go back to ground one. And I just wish people knew like how it's actually really fun to be able to make these kinds of decisions.
Yeah, and you said something really important just now, which was acknowledging societal norms, cultural norms as a part of breaking the rules.
Yeah.
I think it's really important to build trust with your audience so that they
Hmm.
know that you're not coming for something that they might value quite a bit.
Yeah. Yeah. Right.
It's really important to understand why you're doing what you're doing, but doing that in a way that is empathetic to your audience. You really have to be thinking about how is this going to be perceived,
Hmm.
and do try to be aware of that and engage in conversation so people can appreciate you in your efforts to then break the rules or break the mold.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I think there's something super thrilling about rogue artists or rogue people doing things that are like, outside of what we see
Yeah.
most people doing. But I think you also have to recognize that the few people that have been really successful just doing that have observed some social norms along the way or some norms along
Absolutely.
the way.
Totally. Totally.
Yeah.
I teach a business class based on content creation, like how to create content to attract customers online. And there's always two camps of people. Well, there's three, but I'm not going to go into the third because it's not relevant. But the first main categories is people who are trying to master the norms. Okay, like what are the trends? What are the hooks? What are the different like transitions I can do? And and it's okay, like practice makes perfect, but they don't try to master them. They kind of like half-heartedly follow these like societal or like commercially successful videos, but like they don't quite get it, and then they wonder why the videos flop. It's because people can tell that you haven't quite nailed down the details and the specifics of like how to do the transitions or how to do the trends. There's that camp, and then the other camp is like people who try to be like super avant-garde and like think outside the box and do something so like unique and original, which I love, but it's like going back to our point of like, okay, well the algorithm's the algorithm. So do you want to first ride the algorithm? It's that Oprah Winfrey quote. You first have to do what you have to do until you can do what you want to do.
Mhm. Ooh.
Yeah.
My writing teacher in college would always say, "You need to know the rules in order to break the rules
Yeah.
and do that well."
Right.
And that's really I agree. I think that you understanding the rules will further empower you to then do something that changes the fabric of the algorithm in the
Yeah.
social or in the social media apps that you're using. It can change the fabric of an entire social um, community or
Yeah.
the world in some
Mhm.
instances. It can be profound, but it does take a lot of conscious living and creating, I think, to get there.
Yeah, which kind of brings me to the point of like a core trait. that I think we all need. We talked about a lot of different things. We talked about consistency, commitment, all of that collaborative spirit. But I think the other thing people need is like humility too.
Mm,
It's like
yeah.
recognizing you don't have all the answers. You never know what's going to happen. Be ready to, you know, pivot any given moment and might have to like ditch your old idea. Um, I think that's a really highly underrated personality trait if you want to see something come to life.
Humility is a bit of a scary word, I think.
Yeah.
No, I think humility is oftentimes linked with weakness or patience to the point of inaction, even.
Yeah.
But I agree with you. I think that there's an element of, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this, with how humility is exemplified. You had used a really good example of accepting outcomes and recognizing that though it didn't perform or turn out exactly how you were imagining, that you accept it, you acknowledge what is, and
Yeah.
then continue.
Yeah.
There's a
What do you
graciousness to humility. I feel like those
Yeah.
are comparable qualities.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think I was also very lucky, in hindsight, because I had a group of people in my life. I had a community that um cheered not the outcome but the process. So
Mm.
every time because I was like one of those people that would have like a 9 to 5 but did stuff like after work. And like who knew what was going to happen to all my side projects? Like no one had any idea. Like I was spending my own money and time, like burning the midnight oil, just working on creative projects that just may or may not go anywhere. I don't even know if I thought it was going to go anywhere, but I was lucky enough to have friends. There wasn't many. There was only like two, but I was lucky enough to have few people that like did not ridicule me. And when something was a flop, and when I did have to pivot, they were like, "Oh, that's cool." Like it was very much like nonchalant. Like, yeah, like what's next? So I think some having the right people in your life can make humility easier too.
Mm.
Um, because yeah, if you have people that like make fun of you, then the last thing on your mind is to be humble. You want to like prove them wrong. Your ego gets like triggered. So
Yeah, I have experienced that in my life where people have ridiculed an attempt at
yeah,
creating something different.
yeah,
I was choreographing a piece for dance, for two dancers, and I was using accounting of structure that was outside of an 8 count, which is the standard count for dance. It was due to the music, it was due to how I wanted the movements to be strung together. So it was something that I was really testing out and trying. It was very non traditional music in terms of, I would say, Western music. It was a little bit of a combination of Eastern and Western music. And
mhm,
I remember I was workshopping it with a couple other dancers, and one of the dancers said to me, "I don't get it. I just
uh-huh,
don't get it."
uh-huh,
And I was like, "Okay, well, what do you not get?"
right,
And they're like, I don't know. And they got a little bit exasperated.
mhm,
And I laugh a little bit because their style of choreography was ballet. So
of course,
super
yeah,
codified movement,
yeah,
beautiful, but was very like 8 count. We do all the moves exactly
yep,
how we've been trained, which is a way of choreographing. But I was trying something different, and they were just they couldn't explain, first of all, what they didn't get.
yeah,
So I tried to engage in conversation. I
classic,
said, "Okay, well,
yeah,
tell me, is it the way that the movements fit the music? Let's try to have a conversation around it." And I really had to learn from that moment because I was so upset that there was such a visceral and kind of rude response. Like
Yeah.
I was feeling I was very like I was was something I was trying and I didn't feel appreciated.
Yeah.
And so I agree that having people in your life who can give you feedback that is specific, but also let you try things
Yeah.
and who, even if they don't understand exactly what you're trying to do,
Mhm.
will support your process.
Yeah.
And it sounds like you had
Absolutely.
friends like that when you were
Mhm.
transitioning into a more creative space who would do that for you.
Yeah, by the way, I had a version of that in my life too, the ballet person. I definitely
Yeah.
had those characters in my life and never I'm not gonna say I never spoke them again, but I definitely, like, took their words with a grain of salt afterwards because I was like, "I don't need
Yeah.
this." Um, but yeah, I have one friend that comes to mind. I actually was talking to him recently. His name is Andrew, but I was when I was transitioning from screenwriting into tarot. I mean, I was doing both at the same time for years, but there came a point where like tarot was becoming very lucrative, and I was like, okay, I got to make a decision here. And I was seriously grappling inside because I didn't want to give up my screenwriting. And I also wasn't really ready to embrace the whole tarot reading persona or identity. Like that just felt so weird to me. And he
Mhm.
told me, and he was the only person that told me this. And by the way, like he's an engineer, like he has no business, with any of this stuff. But he was like, "Oh, but don't you think they're really similar?" And I was like, "How so?" And he goes, "Well, screenwriting's about, writing a story from your perspective about you or whatever, but tarot reading's about, telling a story for the other person. So it's telling stories
Mm.
about the other people. It's like the same skill, but just different POVs." And I was like, "Oh my God, I never thought about it like that." But that gave me almost like permission to ease into that new identity. And I'm glad I did, but I really needed that unblocking. See, like this is kind of like what I call quantum relationships too. People that kind of help you like jump in or leap up to like this new thing
Mm.
that can open
Mhm.
doors for you. Um, and yeah, it sounds like very simple, but that's like a huge example of how having the right person or the right community could really sort of help you pivot, transition gracefully from one vision to the next because you could just get so caught up in your own thought process. That's not helpful.
Yeah. I think you
Yeah.
also just made an interesting correlation between judgment and
Oh, yeah.
withholding judgment.
Oh, yeah. Mhm. Good point.
With the absolutes, there's judgment being passed. You didn't
Yeah.
follow that rule, you broke that artistic, uh, rule that's in the sand, that we've made here. You broke that artistic rule, and now we're going to punish you because it's not commercially successful or it didn't match the
Right.
algorithm. That's a judgment, it's an absolute. But you also have these people who are open to you trying things or making an attempt and the outcome not being exactly what you wanted or maybe being of a surprise once it's been out there in the world and people are reacting to it.
Yeah.
So I think that's interesting that you brought up the relationships and the group support and the how are people going to respond to this thing that I've been making together because you've brought out that there are judgments and rules, but there's also the way to keep growing and keep fostering responses and engaging people with what you're creating is to have a group of people who will support you in that and cheer you on and remind you why you started and
Yeah.
help you process that feedback too.
And helping you keep your identity fluid
Mhm.
because speaking for myself, I can get really stuck in a singular identity, which is not great. That's not my human design like as a reflector, like I'm supposed to stay open and flexible, but the whole judgment thing, I had to work really hard to overcome that for myself. Like I think that's a very first step. I think everybody listening should first overcome their own self-imposed judgment of like where you should be or what success even looks like. And I think it's good to have a vision, but again, like stay open, because I used to be that person that would look at someone and go like, "Oh, they pivoted because the first one didn't work out." Or like they couldn't get this
Mhm.
first attempt whatever, so they had to like go to their backup plan. Like I used to be very judgmental. Um Definitely towards myself and then towards other people, but now looking back I'm like, holy shit, that's not a, well, first of all, it's not a right thing to judge anybody, but secondarily, like the universe works in mysterious ways. Like you really have to go through certain things to like find a better path, find greener pastures. And when you do make that overture, it doesn't mean that the first thing failed. So I really had to, again, like I couldn't do this alone. It really needed the right people in the community around me. But you're right. Like I think the judgment is like primary, and then comes like the community and all of that. Like, and the judgment and the humility goes hand in hand. Honestly, it's like, because I don't even think the universe will give you new ideas unless you stop judging yourself.
Yes, every new thing that has come into my life, every new revelation has been because I attempted.
Yeah.
I got to this stage of absolutes, judgments, people giving me feedback. And then
Yeah.
usually I found the people that I could move forward with or alongside of in the next iteration of that. Or to your point, maybe I found something that was even more intriguing or meaningful or valuable to me. And that's the direction I took it in. But I
Yeah.
never would have had that insight if I hadn't have attempted in the first place.
Right. Right. I
And I think you do find people through that process too to support you.
Yeah. Someone that just like comes to mind is do you know of Perry Ellis?
I know of Perry Ellis. I don't know the story of Perry.
So he's a fashion designer, right? And like he's known for like men's jeans. I don't know. That's kind of like what I know him as. And my teacher, quote unquote, discovered Perry Ellis like way back in the day. So Perry used to be something totally different. Like he was either like an architect or like an interior designer, just a complete different path. And that's what he wanted to do, but it, obviously just wasn't going anywhere. It doesn't mean that he wasn't good at what he was doing. It was probably goes back to some of that, matrix stuff, the structural stuff that like maybe he wasn't like, or he just didn't know the right people. Connections are huge in the industry. So um so he came to my teacher and they were talking, and just like my teacher said to him, why don't you try fashion? Why don't you try fashion design? And Perry Ellis was so insulted. He was like, I am not, like, his whole thing was like, that's like so like lowbrow. I don't know if he actually said that, but like his whole like attitude towards it was like, this is not as good as like interior design or whatever. But then he went for it anyway. I don't know why, but I think he gave it a shot, like started taking night classes, and then he became this like household name fashion designer.
Yeah,
Right?
that
So yeah.
that's a crazy story. He was so insulted, and then it was like, "Oh, this is actually I'm very good at this and successful."
Yeah, and if you look at that story, it really has the core elements, like having the right perspective slash community. Someone who told him and was like, "Hey, you want to give this thing a shot?" The humility, because I'm sure at some point he like humbled up, and
Mm.
the he actually also didn't do a complete 180. Like he was still in the creative space. He just learned how to like deploy his skills in a different like industry, which I
Mhm.
which I think is about, okay, like look for an opportunity, look for a spot as far as like where you can contribute. Like that is, I think vigilant about that is really important. But anyway, that
Yeah.
just came to mind. I don't know if you know anybody like that, but that is something that I think about often.
I think the something that came to me while you were talking about that was the lightning bolt moment that we talked
Mm,
about in one of our first episodes where you receive an idea and or this thought and then move that forward into the world.
mhm,
And I think a lot of times when we are given the option or opportunity to take on something or pursue something that feels unlike us, or at least how we perceive ourselves at that moment,
Mhm.
it is it's exciting, but it's also terrifying.
Mhm.
And so to be at this stage in the creative process where you are making a judgment
Mhm.
when you're receiving a lightning bolt feels out of sequence to me, because
Mm.
who knows? I do
Yeah.
think that there are talents within each of us or abilities within each of us that we haven't tapped into yet.
Yeah.
And maybe you will need to take some time to develop the skill to make that idea happen, or maybe you'll find somebody to do that with you. But the Perry example is great because I'm sure with a background in architecture, there
Mhm.
was drawing skills, visual design skills.
Yeah.
So to try that out in a fashion space feels comparable in terms of skills, but maybe the persona that he was thinking people might draw for him was not what Perry pictured for himself, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly, and I think it's moments like that where you have to ask yourself, "Okay, how do I respond to society? How do I respond to, um, this world, this pre-existing world that I didn't create, but I have to follow its rules?"
Mhm.
And I I feel like this is such an overlooked part of the creative process because along the way, we get so attached to our ideas, so attached to our vision. We went through all the process of, like, developing the skills, recruiting the right people, and then we get to the final, chapter, and we're like, "Wait, what? There's new rules, or there are things I didn't know?" And I think it's a wonderful point of self-discovery if you're open to it.
Yeah,
What would
I agree. And I think
Mhm,
your example of how you went from screenwriting to tarot is also another example of that, where you had to reckon with your identity a little bit and say, "Okay, well, I'm a storyteller.
mhm.
Where am I having success storytelling?" And
Yeah.
then choosing to pursue a type of storytelling that was really successful and not stopping there.
Yeah, and I think, there's a lot of tarot readers, and I don't even read, like, one-on-one anymore, but when I was reading, there are a lot of tarot readers. So it's like the question is, how do you stand out? And
Mm.
the common denominator across film and tarot is like you just have to touch people's hearts. And honestly, just because you read tarot doesn't mean like you're really emotionally in tune, or you could also just be a crap reader. But I think one thing that I had going for me is like I think I knew how to like really reach someone emotionally because I had that background. It's a formula. I mean, it's not to make it like unromantic, but there is definitely a formula to it. So I think that's kind of what set me apart, and that's the feedback that people also gave me. They were like, the predictions almost didn't matter. It was more like the story that they were um, invested in, which I'm very grateful for. So you're right. I think that there is that identity, but you can always decouple the identity from the skills, the core skills you have, and you can use those skills to create a new identity instead of the identity driving you. Um, which I think is a yeah,
I love
which I
that.
it's hard to stomach, but once you accept it, it's very powerful.
Yeah, I agree. Do you, as a closing thought here,
Yeah.
do you have anything that you feel that the audience would benefit from as they get to this stage of the creation process where they are receiving feedback and then kind of at this precipice of either starting again
Mhm.
or reshaping identity? Do you have any thoughts or wisdom to share on that?
Yeah. Oh gosh, I feel like I mean there's multiple advice I can give. Unfortunately, I don't always take my own advice, so do as I say, not do as I do.
Me too, girl.
Right? Cuz even this podcast, we were like we're making this for ourselves first and foremost, but we hope people
Yeah.
like it, right? There's always that, initial hope. But I would say the number one advice is like always have fun no matter what. Like that's something that I would tell my younger self. Like if you're not having fun, like what are you doing? You can still get the thing that you're looking for, but if you didn't have fun, well, what kind of journey is that?
Yeah.
And when you do keep things light, you can work really, really hard, but still keep things light.
Mhm.
Um, Not be so hard on yourself, like when you make a mistake or don't get what you want. Um, see, that's the thing. Like, I think I'm a pretty hard worker, but I'm also like very forgiving. Like when I mess up, I'm like, oh well. I just gotta like move on. But again, that's like a learned skill. So that would be my primary advice. But yeah, what about yourself? I'm very curious to get your take on it.
Yeah. I think my advice would be to remember that you are not ever at the final destination.
Ooh, yeah.
So I think being playful and curious is a huge part of enacting that. What I mean by this isn't the final destination is that you will continue and have the opportunity to continue to iterate throughout your life
Yeah.
and shape and shift identities, create things that you might have never considered for yourself years ago, but now here you are.
Yeah.
And that can happen week to week, month to month, year to year. There's such a beautiful opportunity to allow for your presence in the world to create something that people will remember and that you
Yeah.
will have made out of a very truthful reckoning with yourself.
Mhm.
Because this is a process. And when I say truthful reckoning, it sounds extremely elaborate, but it's really like being honest with yourself that I am in process, I am learning, I am growing, I have the
Right.
skills that it takes, or maybe I don't, but I have people in my life who I can reach out to.
Right.
So continue to evolve, have fun with it. I completely agree with that. If you're
Mhm.
feeling exhausted and stressed, take a step back. It's okay. We're not rushing here. It doesn't help if you're rushing and not having a good time. So I think that would be my advice.
I love that. Something that you said stood out to me. I think basically it's this whole idea of like this entire podcast series. It's like what based on like the 7 day creation theory slash the first five major arcana cards. The truth is that's not one and done. It's an ongoing process. So I think that's what
Yeah.
you're pinpointing. It's like you're not done until you're done. Like it's never over. Like you're constantly going through the cycle over and over and over again. That's just life. Um, like our skin cells like regenerate, I'm pretty sure, like every so many days. It's the same thing. So
Yeah. And I
mhm,
think that was a huge impetus for the podcast too, was that, you know, could we have scripted this podcast? Yes. But you know
mhm,
what's more authentic as us having a conversation about this and
yeah,
really sharing our own stories and our learning as we go through this process of making a podcast to share what we've learned about creating and realizing your full potential and being the person that you picture for yourself and that
right.
person being somebody who's putting things out into the world that's connecting and building with people and shaping those structures and societies that we live in.
Yeah,
And so I really hope that this has been a starting point for a lot of people to then go back to the beginning and say, okay, now that I've heard each of these steps all the way through, go back and workshop it for yourself. Take time.
yeah,
Start with your infinite potential. Start with that possibility and then work through and see what you discover. It's an
yeah.
open opportunity.
I love that. I completely agree. I think that there's a lot of good information that we've shared with the audience that they can go back and like kind of re-listen. Especially if you're kind of like in a creative rut and don't know where to go. Look at what stage of the process you're in and self-diagnose and just know that you're not done until you're done. So just keep going and not give up. Well, thank
Yeah,
you.
and we have your back. You are not alone in this.
We
Hey,
we
June,
do
me,
have
we're all in the same cycle with you.
oh yeah, we're in middle of it constantly.
Yeah.
So nobody's alone. Um
Yeah.
Well, thank you everyone for tuning in, and thank you so much, Elizabeth, for your time. This has been like amazing and fun and such a wonderful journey. And I'm pretty sure we're going to do another podcast in the future.
Yeah, for sure. I've had so much fun doing this with you, and I'm excited to see what the future iterations look like. Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone, for listening.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning into Creator Soul, a podcast miniseries presented in collaboration by Pheydrus and Potter Productions. We hope you enjoyed the series and discovered something to inspire your journey. Although this is the end of the miniseries, we'd love to hear from you and continue the conversation. Say hello by contacting us in any of the ways detailed in the episode description. We look forward to hearing from you. Until then, find the joy, do the work.